And I think there is no issue more important than economic development. Mr. Patmon, are you all right? Do you need technical assistance? No? We're okay. You both spoke at length about how well-positioned the city of Cleveland is for economic success in the future. And I think regardless of how well-positioned it is, the fact is that I would imagine just about everybody in the room here and listening would agree that position is one thing, but moving forward is another. And so, Mayor Jackson, starting with you, how will you move the city forward, as specifically as you can be?
Well, it's several ways. One, you have to deal with the times you're in and the economic crisis that we're facing. And that has allowed us to almost reinvent the way in which we engage businesses. Give you an example. There are businesses that have contracts to supply goods and services, but they can't get a line of credit. So one of the things that we've done is to develop an economic development program that will provide up to $200,000 for working capital so that that company can provide, have a line of credit so they can work and actually perform on that contract. That has kept them afloat, and it's also kept them from having to lay people off. So that's like the immediate stuff. But when you look into the future, you have to look at where the world is going. I don't want to be and move Cleveland where the world is today. I want to move Cleveland where the world will be tomorrow. And when you do that and you look at the way in which things are happening, it is a green economy, a sustainable economy, not just an economy based on the product per se, but how do we function in a way that is sustainable, that will last for decades. And that is where we're moving. And that's why I've held the 3-day summit, why we formed the commission that will help to develop the strategic plan, and why we will have an annual 1-day summit that will hold us accountable in terms of where we've gone, what suggestions we need to do. So is that those are two things that I can mention.
Mr. Patmon, what would you do, and what would you have done differently over the last 4 years?
One of the things that I would have done is that when National City actually fell on its face, the city of Cleveland could have moved in and actually asked for that money and bought the bank, a city-owned bank. If Green Bay, Wisconsin can own the Green Bay Packers, the city of Cleveland could have owned National City Bank. Secondly, I would create a string of incubators hooked to venture capital funds to create small business. It's the biggest driver of employment in the whole region. They're doing some things like that in other cities. We have to do those here. You can't just say, okay, create a business or give them a loan. Give them support, give them a building that to put folks into, and then some venture capital as an infusion so that those things, those ideas actually turn into inventions. They've done that same thing over in Pittsburgh. We should do it in great degree here. You can look at a budget and figure out where the priorities are. In our budget, we spend probably about $1.4 million a year in economic development department out of the general fund. There's some other money that comes in. I would actually triple that money so that we have a one-stop business center in the city of Cleveland. You get your permit, you get your license, you get some counseling, and you get some point in directions like that venture capital fund, like those incubators.
Where would you cut then?
Where would I cut?
If you're going to put another $3 million towards economic development, where would you reallocate from?
There's enough waste that you don't have to cut anything. That's one. Two, you need to grow the pie. What we've been doing is going backwards. We try to budget our way out of this. You can't save your way out when the city's shrinking and its resources. You must grow the city, grow its businesses, grow its tax base. That is the way out of this, and that's what we have to do.
Can I respond a little bit?
Sure, go ahead.
First of all, I do not waste anything. How do I waste anything?
Mayor Jackson, okay, well, go ahead.
I want to go point to that because what I agree with Mr. Patmon is you cannot save your way into prosperity. So you have to have economic growth. And that is why we do the things that we do and build off the strengths that we have. And that is why the $40 million a year in the medical market I supported, because it's an investment in the strength, expecting a return on that investment. The same way we've invested to jumpstart the East Bank project again. And the reason why I believe that issue 3 is a good thing for Cleveland, not because of gaming per se, but next year we'll have over $1 billion worth of development going on, and after that construction phase, then we'll go into the permanent job. So I think there's real stuff, but the waste part is we've spent 3 years through Operation Efficiency, a partnership between the public and private sector. Private sector helping us to reinvent and reform the way we deliver service. And we currently have another consultant on board to help us go deeper into that, to help deal with what we know will be a challenging year next year, as all of you have in terms of your budgets, because of the loss of jobs, the loss of revenue, and the increasing costs. So
Mayor Jackson,
we don't waste.
There's really zero waste in City Hall? Every job is absolutely necessary?
No, I cannot say there's zero waste. I say
I thought that's what you just said.
Exactly. I'm glad somebody.
I said we do not waste. We do not waste. Now, if I were at Optimal here, then I would not need to constantly engage with Operation Efficiency every week and look at all of our operations every week to see if we can squeeze some more savings and be more efficient in delivery of service and to our customers, whether they're citizens or businesses. But no, if I said that or if I was interpreted that way, that is not the way I meant it. There is always something you can do better, but we do not waste.
Okay. Let's move on to the schools. Mr. Patmon, you raised this as an issue. You said that school CEO Eugene Sanders should find another job if he's not able to do this one. I'd like to ask you to explain a little bit more about what you think ought to be happening in the schools, what's gone wrong, and what would you have done differently?
Well, what's gone wrong is that we are graduating almost only half of the students that go to the Cleveland Public Schools. If you listen to some folks, it's 34%, others 53%. In both cases, poor. Too poor for us to survive as a city. We have only 12% of the people inside the city limits who have a college education. That's what people look at when they locate corporations here. If we don't begin to educate our young folks, then we won't be able to job our way out of this, save our way out of this, or anything else. What I would have done differently is I would have first said to Eugene Sanders, if you can educate and graduate 86% of the kids in Toledo, Ohio, you must do the same thing here. You cannot have a different set of rules here. I have a plan to divide it up into segments so that we can get our arms around it and see what we can do about getting some responsibility to the people who use the system. But the number one thing is to make the people who run the system accountable. And if you can't find some huge impediments for them not doing what they do across this state, and that's graduate 72% of the kids, what they do in other cities, then time to go. The public dollar is too valuable. The children are too valuable. What I would say to you unequivocally, that anybody who stood in the way of educating Cleveland's children, whether it was whoever, I would fight them to the very end, fire who I needed to, and get that school system working, because no young person is going to raise a family inside this city unless the school system works. And let me say, there are some successes out there. There is E-Prep that actually takes some 6th through 8th graders, put them through a system, and they score higher. Even though they have some poor socioeconomic conditions, they score higher. Nothing wrong with the children, something wrong with the system.
Mr. Patmon, thank you very much. Mayor Jackson, earlier this week when you and I spoke about the schools, you said that you are ultimately responsible for the performance there. What's gone wrong? What hasn't worked? And how will that change in the next 4 years?
Well, I don't know if you can label just one thing as not working or put it on somebody and say that it's somebody's fault, like Dr. Sanders. When Dr. Sanders was brought here, he was brought here because he was successful in Toledo. And he was brought here with the high expectation that he would turn this system around, similar to what he had done in Toledo. Now, I still have confidence in Dr. Sanders.